Hello and welcome to the animation school. Wow, it's been amazing from modeling to character creation to rigging. I know it's really tedious and I know that it's taking a lot, it's taking your time and energy. And it's only one thing I want to know if you're getting value for this. And I did warn you from the beginning that it's going to be hands-on, it's going to be really practical, and I'm glad that some of you are you know taking this very seriously. All right, so in animation school we'll be going through the 12 principles of animation and how you can apply it in your animation before we go into character animation in proper. So the reason why we go through these principles is because you have to have these principles in mind before animating anything or while animating anything, so that it makes your animation more believable, more natural, more dramatic, more appealing to your audience. So you wouldn't want to just jump into animation, start pulling things around. So you have to understand the intent of your character or your object, why the character has to move a certain way, and even when it moves, why it has to be appealing or more presentable at the end of the day. All right, so without wasting your time, so I'll be jumping straight into showing you the 12 principles of animation, how it works and what you should look out for. And I'll be using a reference from Brownback Films, and they did a good job when it came to explaining that. So I'll just be using their illustration to actually buttress my point. All right, so let's jump straight in. So this principle was created by Disney in the 1930s. So it's the 12 principles of animation are a set of guidelines that can help that can be used. That can be used to create smooth and believable animation, just like I've told you already. All right. So the first principle is squash and stretch. Squash and stretch. So if you look at this bag, the way it squashes before it makes its action, and before it lands, the way it stretches. So this principle is very important when animating any character, and it not necessarily every character. So like the transformer character may not necessarily need squash and stretch because it's highly technical and highly mechanical. So squash and stretch, so it's like it says here, I say this principle. Don't worry, I'm going to give you access to this slide so you could so see it for yourself in your spare time and read it and make reference to it at any point in time. So the principle refers to the way the object or the character changes shape as they move. By exaggerating the amount of squash and stretch in a character or object, you can give the impression of weight and momentum. So for example, from this illustration, you could see that the character has to gain momentum before it makes its action, and has to also have that impression, the weight. It has to give you impression of weight before it lands. So that principle is highly important when animating. So you just have to pay attention to it. And I believe at the end of this course you would watch animations differently. Now, for example, the Hotel Transylvania has a lot of squash and stretch principle in that animation, from how the head moves to how they walk to how they talk. You'd find a lot of squash and stretch in those animations. So the next is anticipation. So it shows you the action the character makes before the original action, just like it says that this principle is all about setting up the action before it happens. So for example, you could see that when you're walking, you have to first gain momentum before you start walking. Before you throw something, let's say you want to throw a tennis ball, you have to gain momentum, maybe pull back your arm a bit, then fling the ball. So that's pulling back is called anticipation, just like you're seeing with my bag right here. So the pulling back is the anticipation before it makes the original action. So that anticipation is the action before the action. So in acting, it's called preliminary action. So there's this preliminary action before it makes the original action. So by showing the character or object preparing for an action, you can build suspense and make the final action feel more impactful. So anything whatsoever. So nothing just happens. So there's always an anticipation. There's always a suspense before anything happens. Even when a ball is moving, so there's always this anticipation before the ball moves at the end of the day. So don't worry, we're going to practice this and you'll see this in action. All right, next is staging. It says the principle is about effectively communicating an idea or an action to an audience. So for example, if you watch this, so this is the flat image, and for the designers, they know well not to present an image like that. So your staging is very important when you're you're posing your character, or you're putting your character in the shot. The staging is very important. Don't worry, we're going to go through it in practice. So staging, very important. This can also be done through the use of lighting, positioning, and acting. Just like I said, positioning is very important when in your shots on how you animate it. Not necessarily how you animate it, pretty much the layout, how you place your character, the angle. That's pretty much how the angle looks like when you're placing your character. So we are going to go into that in practice. It's best explained when we are practicing. So the next is straight ahead and pose to pose. So pose to pose means you have to set up key poses on your timeline before filling in the complementary pose. So this is straight ahead. So straight ahead means you animate your character or your objects frame by frame by frame, maybe 4-frame intervals till you get to the end of the action. While pose to pose is that you set up one pose first, then you go to another frame, set up the next pose, then the last pose, then you fill in the rest. The oldies call it twinning. So you twin, you have that twinning effect. So you can see that ghost effects. So those are the twinning animation you have to do in between the frame, in between the keys or the keyframes, or however you want to call it. So straight ahead action involves drawing out the entire scene or action in one continuous sequence. So there's that continuous animation at the end of, so you can see there's a continuous animation until it reaches the end of the frame. While pose to pose is involved breaking the scene down into key poses and then filling in the action in between those poses. So those in betweens, you fill them out when you're done posing your animation, which usually when animating is advisable to do pose to pose first, then you fill in case you want to change anything in between, as against or supposed to straight ahead, where you have to animate frame by frame by frame. So in case you want to change something, don't worry, I'm going to go into it in detail, and you would see the advantages and the disadvantages of each and every one of them. So next is follow through and overlapping. So you would see there's a follow through from this action, and there's an overlapping when it reaches the original act, the final action. So it says here, follow through refers to the way the parts of the object or character continue moving after the main action has stopped. So for example, in real life, you could find that in rabbits, in a dog, when a dog is running, there is this overlap on the tail, on the ears. Yes, sometimes depending on the kind of dog, like my dog is a Rottweiler, so when he's running, you find his jaws always have this overlapping effect, and his tail always, there's this overlap and there's this follow through when he's running. So even when you're jumping, maybe you're wearing a jacket and you jump from a distance, you would find that your jacket lands after you've landed. So it's called overlap and follow through. So sometimes the jacket even bounces. So this little subtle detail are very important in animation. So you would find them. I believe you can go out and use your eyes, see for yourself how these principles play out in your animation. It's very subtle but very, very effective when animating as a professional. All right, the next is slow in and slow out. So this is pretty self-explanatory, how your character slows into the shot and slows out also. There's this, you could find this subtle, there's a subtle easing effect the character has. It adds a more natural and believable feel to your shot. So there's this slow in and slow out effect. So it's pretty self-explanatory. So then next one is arc, which is really important when animating. Let's say you're animating a jump. This character is jumping, so you could see there is this natural arc, that's invisible arc. I mean, though would activate it in Blender. So there's this arc it has when when you're animating. So you have to pay attention to those arcs so it looks more natural and realistic. When you could see how it turns and it creates an arc. So that is really, really important when animating. There's a principle you should bear in mind, especially if your character is making hand gestures, maybe jumping or running. Running, jumping, and especially when an object is spending a few seconds on the air, or in the air rather, you have to pay attention to those arcs so it looks more natural and more believable. Okay, the next is secondary action. Very important. Secondary action. Everything has secondary action when landing, especially if for a two object like this, it doesn't land at once. There has to be some bounce. A typical example is the bowling ball and a football. So a football has less weight than the bowling ball. So if you throw a bowling ball, it may bounce maybe one or twice, whereas a football would bounce maybe 5 to 6 times before it reaches its resting action or resting place. So that's how it works. That secondary action, when you drop something, or maybe you drop your hand on a table, there is a secondary action you have to add to it, to add that that realistic and to add that that depth to your, or realism to your shot. So that's a principle of secondary action. Sorry, I'm going fast on this. I want to really explain this better when we are animating, so you actually see it in practice. Whereas you can actually get the gist of this principle and apply it on your object by mere seeing this illustration. So this is called timing, principle of timing. So you can see there is a build up here before the object lands. So it's a principle about controlling the pace of an animation by adjusting the number of frames between key poses. So whether it's a build up here, or at the middle, or at the end, it works as against just having a free fall or just a free action without putting in the principle of timing, which we are going to see in our next lesson. So don't worry, we are going to go through it in practice. So the next is exaggeration. This is really important, especially as an animator. You have to be able to stretch the character. So you could see this illustration, how the first character just makes an action, the second character makes an exaggerated action to give that dramatic experience to your shots or to your film. So there's that. You would find it, I like making reference to Hotel Transylvania. You would find it more there, where before they run, there's this, the legs have to spin a bit. That's exaggeration. Maybe they are dancing salsa, they have to turn. You would find more of that exaggeration in that animation. So there are a lot of animation that have exaggeration to it, so you always want to add exaggeration to make it more dramatic, make it more interesting, as against this boring one. So exaggeration, it's pretty much not making your shot boring, if I would say so, like that. Okay, next is solid drawing. So I have not really used this principle before, but mostly it adds depth to your to your shots. So which Blender already is a 3D software, so I think this principle works best for 2D artists, to add that three-dimensional feel to your drawing, which Blender already has a three-dimensional software which you can actually add depth to your shots. So mostly you can actually use shadows to get this principle, where you cast shadows on you use your lighting to cast shadows from your objects, or from a particular angle. So we'll practice this when we start the animation proper. So finally is the appeal. I can't stress this enough. You went through how to create a character, the hair system, the clothing, depending on the psychology of the character, or depending on the personality of the character, you'd want to present it to the audience such that the audience will immediately get the kind of character this person is, or the kind of personality the character is. So that's where appeal comes in. It's the principle about creating a character or object that is visually appealing and likable by the audience. So imagine you're seeing, I don't know if you've seen Soul. You see the black character, you would immediately know that this guy is a father, He loves music, from the way he plays his keyboard. You know, you actually like and love the character immediately. There's also Moana. There is also I still reference Hotel Transylvania because they have amazing, interesting characters in that animation. Boss Baby 2 also has that appeal when you're watching it. So that's it for the 12 principles of animation. You may add it to all of them. I don't think you would necessarily need to add all of them to your shots, right? Some of them you add some of them to, they are very subtle but very, very key when animating, from squash and stretch to anticipation to overlap to staging to appeal to timing. They are really, really important, especially if you want to be a good animator. Okay, so let's jump into our next lesson without wasting any much of your time. You're going to get our hands dirty and start animating our first object. So see you in class. Bye.